I'm Paul Collier, this is Colin Mayer. We're both professors at Oxford, and so we're used to the phenomenon that the only seats in the lecture hall left free are in the front row. So you're welcome to come and sit down there if you like. We'll be talking about our ideas coming out of complementary books that we wrote last year. Colin wrote Prosperity. I wrote The Future of Capitalism. And the ideas in them fit together, and that's what we're going to be presenting this morning. I'm going to start off because The Future of Capitalism sets the larger scene of our society and why it's gone wrong. And Colin will then drill down onto the specifics of the role of business. So, to get started, capitalism is a vital system, but over the last 40 years, it's derailed, and it has been derailed by two highly influential ideas, influential both in government and in business, that seemed at the time to be very good ideas. And they now turn out to be fundamentally wrong. The first of those ideas is economic man. Economic man is a characterization by economists of human nature. It's a radical simplification. Economic man is greedy, lazy, and selfish. And that seemed a sensible reductionist approximation in the 1950s, when that's how people interpreted evolutionary biology. It just seemed the Darwinian process, the survival of the fittest, produced in all species the greedy, selfish, lazy, epitomized by the lion, right? Or descended from the lion, your own domestic cat. It's pretty accurate: greedy, lazy, selfish. Right? You recognize that. So economic man, by definition, cannot be trusted. Right? You can't trust your cat. And economic man, by definition, is incapable of being morally load-bearing. Right? So that's one idea. That's your workforce as a chief executive. Right? And the other idea was economic man is rational, and therefore he comes to understand the world around him. In economic phrase, he knows the model. He knows how the world works. Right? And so the leader's problem, whether he's leader of a country or leader of a company, the leader's problem is he knows what to do, and the problem is he's sitting on a workforce that doesn't want to do it. Right? And economics came up with a solution to that problem. Right? Technically, it's called principal agent theory. What it meant was you monitor people like a hawk, you build a monitoring system, and you incentivize them with carrots and sticks. And that was implemented across business. It's got to be top-down. The leader knows what to do. The problem is designing a structure which forces these greedy, lazy, selfish people to do it. And so you have a top-down, centralized, taught structure of contracts. And that's what we've built over the last 40 years. Right? For example, in Britain, there's a survey, annual survey, jobs and skills. Asked the same question for decades. Have you got enough autonomy in your job to do it properly? Enough room of discretion. If we go back 25 years, most people said, yeah, I've got enough autonomy to do my job properly. Now, there's been a 40% drop in yes. Most people say, no, I haven't got enough autonomy. Right? I've been turned into an automaton by this structure of monitoring and incentives. So that's the residue of these ideas. greedy, lazy economic man, and we know best, the leader knows best. We know how the world works. Turns out those ideas which looked to be inevitable consequences of evolution are actually false. They're right for cats. Right? But for the 500,000 years during which Homo sapiens has evolved, modern evolutionary biology has realized that humans are not like that. We are a uniquely pro-social species. Got a friend, an evolutionary biologist, who says, every time I get in a plane, I'm astounded. Because if you put any other mammal species, 100 of them, into a plane and into a metal tube, shut the door for 10 hours, when you open that door, it would be carnage, to quote a word. And instead, humans sit like you're sitting now, right? That's unique, right? Humans have evolved to be uniquely capable of trust, of loyalty, and a purpose beyond self. Right? You don't have to take... I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but if you read modern evolutionary biologists, Nicholas Christakis' book last year, Blueprint, Joe Heinrich's book, 2016, The Secret of Our Success, that's their message. We are uniquely pro-social. We've actually got two natures in us. Of course, we are also descended from the apes, and they are greedy, lazy, and selfish. And so we've got that side of our nature. But that's not the only side of our nature. We've built, through 500,000 years of evolution, a capacity for pro-sociality. And so we're capable of both. The last 40 years of principal agent, the monitored incentives, has pushed us back to the ape. But we're capable of much better, and for most of humanity, we've depended upon the better. Now let me turn to what that means in practice. And it requires a special form of leadership. Humans uniquely have evolved two modes of leadership. In the animal kingdom, there's only one, dominance. And we've got that, we can see that in the human world, right? That's the ape in us, right? There's plenty of leadership by dominance. Commander-in-chief, I know best, here you do it. Right? But humans uniquely have evolved another form of leadership, which is much more evolutionarily successful, and that is leadership through respect. The leader makes enough personal sacrifices to demonstrate commitment to purpose that they gain the respect of the group, and they lead not by being commander-in-chief, but by being communicator-in-chief. That's the magic, communicator-in-chief. What communicators-in-chief build is purpose beyond self, forward-looking common purpose. Without that forward-looking common purpose built by good leadership, we would not have been able to build modernity. That's why no other species has built a complex world capable of amazing purposes. Right? We have done it. But over the last 40 years, we've reverted inadvertently to dismantling it. We built modernity, the world of modernity, of complexity, of purpose beyond self, through leadership by respect. That is how we are going to restore modernity. Thank you. Let me hand over to Colin.
Well, I'm going to describe how business can do exactly what Paul was just talking about. And it's all about the theme of this meeting, and that is the Universal Declaration of the Purpose of a Company in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Purpose has become widely accepted as being a key component of business. The real question is, what is it? What do we mean by a business purpose? How should businesses actually do it? And what, when they do it, is the effect on business as well as the rest of society. And let me just start off by saying that purpose of business is not simply to make money. It's not just about profits. It's about something much more fundamental, because the purpose of a business is why it exists, why it's created, and what it's there to do. Purpose of a business is to solve problems profitably, to solve the problems of people and planet profitably. And in the process, it produces profits, but profits are not per se the purpose of business. Everyone who runs successful businesses knows that to be the case. And they don't profit from producing problems for people or planet. Now, underpinning this is not just a vague notion of the purpose of business. It's neither purely descriptive in being a mission statement of what a company does, nor is it simply aspirational in terms of being a vision statement of what the company is doing to save the world. It's precise. It's precise about what problems a company is going to solve, how it's going to solve them, for whom, when it's going to solve them, and why that company is particularly well suited to solving that problems. And I want to just illustrate that in relation quickly to one example of a company that has gone through this process of finding its purpose. It's the Danish pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk, which makes insulin used in the treatment of type 2 diabetes. And it recognized that its purpose is not simply to produce insulin. Its purpose, it reckoned, was to help people treat type 2 diabetes. And it worked with a whole series of parties around the world, including doctors and hospitals, in identifying the best treatments for type 2 diabetes. Then it realized that actually that even wasn't its purpose either. Its purpose was to help people avoid getting type 2 diabetes in the first place. So it worked with local communities, with health workers, with national governments to identify the changes in lifestyle that could help people avoid getting type 2 diabetes. Now that brings out very clearly the notion of what specifically one means by a corporate purpose. The way then of embedding it and giving commitment to the delivery of that purpose is through four key elements. The first is in terms of the ownership of companies. Those who own companies should take responsibility for defining those purposes and ensuring that they are reflected in the values of the company. And that's very much the case of family businesses, where there's a clearly defined owner. It's the case in Novo Nordisk, that's actually owned by a foundation that helps to define that purpose. But the second element is then how is it embedded through the running of the company, through the board of directors of companies. And that's again illustrated through the way in which it's been done in the case of Novo Nordisk, through the board ensuring that it establishes its purpose, the values, the strategy, and the culture that's associated with the delivery of those purposes. And that's also reflected in the way in which it allocates its resources and measures its performance against those purposes. And that notion of measurement, being able to measure whether or not a company delivers on its purpose, is a key element. And last week, we had Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, setting out how he's transforming his company to measure the extent to which it's going to become carbon zero in terms of its scope 1 and 2 own operations by the middle of this decade. And it's going to be net carbon negative in terms of its supply chains as well by 2030. But it goes further than that in saying that we're actually there to help other companies solve its environmental problems through providing them with the information and the control systems to allow them to do that. And that's going to be reflected increasingly in the way in which performance is evaluated. Last week, we not only had the second largest company, Microsoft, saying this. We had the largest investment management company, BlackRock, saying that not only should companies have a clearly defined purpose, but that it will measure its performance in terms of its sustainable accounting standards board, SASB measures, and TCFD measures of performance, and it will divest from companies that don't show a great enough degree of transparency and an approach of actually delivering on those objectives. Now, the importance of this comes not only in terms of shifting our notion of capitalism away from being just about ownership for profit towards solving problems, but in terms of one of the key elements that underpins what Paul was just talking about in terms of recreating the real notion of responsibility and delegation of decision-taking within organizations and within us as human beings. And Novo Nordisk illustrates that again very well, because you might well say, well, that's all very well. That company having all of those aspirational notions of solving type 2 diabetes. But doesn't it undermine the fundamental model of the company? And the answer is absolutely no. It's been associated with a growing, thriving business. Why? Because increasingly, it's become a trusted supplier. It's built up relations of trust with the governments, with the health workers, with the medical professionals, that it's built up those partnerships with, as being a trusted provider of both health products and advice. And that notion of building up trust is critically important, because we all want to do a good day's job. We all want to have meaningful, fulfilling employment that we can feel a sense of pride and dignity about. And to do that, we have to be trusted to do that, and we have to have businesses that we can trust to deliver their purposes. Because ultimately, trust is one of the most important assets of business. And trustworthy corporations are commercially successful corporations, and the competitiveness of nations depends on the trustworthiness of its businesses for the prosperity of all of us, for the present and for the future. Thank you.
And we've left ourselves time so that, don't forget, we believe in decentralized decision-taking and participation. We've left ourselves time for you. So, questions, comments?
Hello, thank you for your presentations. My name is Judy O. I'm a global shaper from the World Economic Forum. I am also have been thinking a lot about purpose, and I've been working with companies to help them discover it and embed it in their business. And while I'm here today at Davos and this week, a lot of the conversations has been about who the purpose is going to impact, which is the stakeholder capitalism. And while this paradigm shift from shareholders to all stakeholders is an important one, I haven't heard enough companies talk about how they will uniquely deliver on their purpose to benefit all stakeholders. Can you just comment a little bit about the importance of distinguishing the stakeholders from how the company will uniquely and authentically deliver it through their purpose?
Absolutely right, and that's a key element, which actually what Microsoft announced last week, I think illustrates very well. And that is to say, you not only say what your purpose is, but you also set out very clearly criteria by which you can be judged as to whether or not you're actually delivering on it. And that notion of having measurable ways of being able to evaluate purpose is something that is a key aspect in terms of shifting it away from being a very nice notion to being something that really does have the power to transform the way in which our businesses and economies evolve. And that is the path that I believe that we're now set on achieving, and it's up to business to make sure it does that.
Yeah, just right next.
Thank you. My name is Mark Vernooy. I run a school called Think, School of Creative Leadership. And on this notion of purpose and defining your purpose, if you talk about this pharma company, they kind of upped their level of abstraction,
Absolutely.
right? In the case of Microsoft, it seems like they added something to make sure that they do no harm to the planet, which seems different from a purpose of solving a problem. Their problem solving seems to be more in helping us be more effective and efficient in the way we operate. So it seems slightly different here. So I wonder if you can comment on, one, in upping your level of abstraction, how do you prevent from getting a nosebleed and solving happiness? So where's the, kind of the right level and how do you judge that? And the other side, is it about finding your purpose here or making sure you do no harm? And where's the balance there?
Okay, again, another excellent question. And as I said, there are two key components to the notion of purpose. The first one is this notion of solving problems profitably. The second is not profiting from producing problems. Now, the second one is really what we mean simply by responsible business. Okay? And the case that I was describing of Microsoft illustrates that very well, where it's up to the notion of what it means to do no harm to a level that I now think is seriously realistic. Okay?
Yeah.
The case of Novo Nordisk illustrates the other. That is to say, how does one define a positive benefit that one's seeking to achieve, namely to eliminate diabetes? And how does one, in practice, move from where the company started off, namely it's there to produce insulin, to thinking about what does that mean in practice in terms of solving that problem. And that notion of building up partnerships with other groups that companies traditionally don't work closely with, including NGOs and local communities, etc., is a key component of being able to actually deliver on those notions of purpose.
I work a lot with natural resource companies around the world, especially the ones working in very poor countries. And that is very stark trade-off between short-term maximization of shareholder value and long-term maximization of impact on solving human problems. So short-term shareholder value is achieved if the company sets up a complex web of subsidiaries in which it shifts all the profits out of the country, so there's no tax liability there, and parks it in, let's say, Netherlands Antilles. Right? So that's maximizing short-term shareholder value. Solving human problems, these are very often the poorest countries on earth, and their one valuable resource is the stuff under the ground, and the company has the vital role of extracting that and getting global value for it. And then it is the custodian of that value. In the process, it's generating jobs, it's inflicting potential damage on the environment where the local community lives, and so there is a lot of stuff that it can do. And it can be measured, and if you wanted two very simple measures, it would be the jobs impact on the community and the tax revenues paid to government. So that would be taking into account trying to solve humanity's major problems. So it'd be a hugely purposeful role, but it would be a long distance from short-term shareholder value.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah.
My name is Rupert Howes. I run a global program promoting sustainable fishing and working with industry across the supply chain from producers to retail and food service. My question is, how optimistic are you that this transition of corporations and corporate culture is going to reach scale in time to really deliver a change that accords to the IPCC climate predictions? People are talking about 10 years. I've just come from a session where Greta Thunberg was saying we have 8 years left. If you look at the latest IPCC reports, it seems like we're evolving too slowly. Back to your 500,000 years of evolution, this is where companies need to be, but how many, maybe this is my question, how many are actually operating like this now, and do you think they're operating within sustainable limits?
Do you want to start off there?
Well, fish, that's different from climate, right? Not everything is climate. The reducing poverty in very poor countries, they're affected by climate. Their job, poor countries, is not to reduce their carbon emissions, is to try and generate some income for their productive jobs for their population, right? With fish, it's clear, we can work out what the time scale is. It's pretty short, and it's clear that we've not done a good job of building solutions to it. But that's what Davos at its best can do. It can ignite a shift in the mindset of the leaders who are leading these companies who can deliver these purposes. We can achieve it. It's a matter of leadership by a relatively small number of people.
I mean, my response to you a year ago would have been I was hopeful but not optimistic. At the beginning of this year, I'm much more optimistic than I was 12 months ago. Why is that the case? Because I've seen a significant shift in attitude of business leaders like Satya Nadella in terms of their recognition that it is their responsibility to take the lead on this. They should not simply wait for governments to do it. And I think it's critical that that is reflected in the way in which business in general is responding. Now let's come back to the case that Paul was talking about in terms of resource extractive companies, and in particular oil companies. Right? Now, oil companies are transitioning to the recognition that they are energy companies. What's the purpose of an energy company? The purpose of an energy company is to solve our energy problem in sufficiently quick order that we can actually survive that process. Okay? Now, what that needs is for companies like Shell and BP to take a lead in terms of saying how they are actually going to do that. And as Microsoft has illustrated, it means a recognition of having a much faster process of doing that, and doing that in a very clearly defined way, where they're again being measured against their success in delivering on that. I haven't seen enough energy companies really set that out sufficiently clearly. I've heard lots of warm words, but what we need to see and what we need to encourage those companies to be doing is to take a lead. Now, they are not on their own going to solve that problem, because ultimately it's technology and innovation and new companies coming into the field that are going to essentially provide the major transition. But we still need our major resource energy delivery companies to be part of that process and being at the forefront.
Let me close with one remark. The effect of economic man being not incapable of moral load-bearing. Over the last 40 years, we've moved to a world in which the only actors are individuals, greedy, selfish individuals, and who's morally load-bearing? Government. And so we've shriveled the world into just two classes of actors. Government, which does all the oughts, what ought to be done, and individuals who are not, have no moral responsibility. That world cannot work. We know evolutionary biology has shown what is resilience. Its resilience is widely distributed decision-making, widely distributed responsibility for purpose. That means you cannot wait on government. The key actors in the material world are businesses. And so across the business world, you have to become morally load-bearing, capable of delivering yourselves these purposes without waiting for this phantom government which is loaded up with obligations on which it cannot deliver. It is far too centralized to be able to run a command and control system for the world. That does not work.
Next question.
Hi, good morning. Antonio Zappul, I'm CEO of the Thomson Reuters Foundation. My question is going back to the definition of purpose. Do you see this as a principle that applies to all companies, or, forgive me the pun, there are some companies which are not fit for purpose? And I'm thinking of tobacco companies, I'm thinking of gambling companies. So you earlier said no company has interest in producing or giving problems to people. But I struggle to understand how, for example, a gambling company or a company that produces products that we know are harmful could actually have a purpose.
Not only is it the case that this purpose is relevant to all companies, but it's also relevant well beyond the corporate sector as well, to thinking about how governments and other organizations, including philanthropic organizations, should be organizing themselves. Let me pick up your particular examples of what are sometimes termed the sin stocks, namely tobacco, alcohol, gambling, arms manufacturers, fossil fuel companies, etc. How does one define a purpose of a tobacco company? Well, the answer is that a tobacco company is there to produce a product that should be non-addictive, healthy, environmentally friendly, but yet deliver on what people are seeking from those products in terms of giving them enjoyment, relaxation, and a way of enhancing their social interaction. That is precisely what the purpose of a company like that should be. And in thinking about how does one transition from the current product to the types of products they need to be producing, what they need to do is, first of all, to identify that purpose as clearly as I'm trying to define it now, and then thinking about how does one transition people away from their dependence on addictive products to those types of products that I'm just talking about. And it's much more prevalent than you might think in terms of those companies that I've just, tobacco, alcohol, gambling, etc. It basically applies to lots of our food products, to our fast food products, where there are the same elements of addiction to relatively unhealthy foods. Increasingly, food manufacturers are recognizing that they are not sustainable. The game is up, that they have to shift to thinking about new ways of delivering their purposes, but they need to do it quickly. It's exactly the same issue as the energy companies. It's no good just saying we're on a journey. You have to say, what are you going to achieve, when are you going to achieve it by, and how are you going to get there? Yeah, one last question, and then I think we're going to have to draw it to a close. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Then I'll be super quick. Hi, my name's Olivia. I'm from IKEA, also very proudly purpose-led organisation, setting a target of 2030 to be climate positive, not waiting for 2050. You spoke a lot about the actions that need to happen, and I think that's really necessary. But can you say a few brief words around the cultural shifts and the behavioural norms that we need to establish to achieve those actions, because actions alone are an outcome of something else. So how do we make this a new normal culturally?
Yeah, and IKEA is a very good illustration, and it's a case that I often cite as an example. It falls into the category of another company that's in a foundation-owned firm, and for that very reason, it's being able to establish a clearly defined purpose. It's had the leadership from the top that has instilled that notion of culture that's associated with it. What is required to bring about that cultural shift is, first of all, identifying the values that go with those purposes, in terms of what are the key elements that are required for people in the business to be able to be, as Paul was saying, morally load-bearing. All right? What will shift people away from just being dependent on incentives, on monetary incentives, to deliver on their company's purposes, and realize that it's inherent in their success in the business for them to promote that company purpose, not simply on the basis of monetary incentives. And the most successful companies are those that establish those values, set them out very clearly, embed them throughout the organization from the top to the shop floor, and then let people get on and run their jobs and their businesses in the way that they think appropriate, not having them continuously overseen by people from above or having incentives that are simply designed to align them with the delivery of a greater level of financial return and profit for the business. Those are the key elements.
So that the reward and promotion structure in the firm must be aligned with those purposes. You can't say one thing and reward a different pattern of behavior. And so it has to be internally consistent. You have to walk the talk in the reward system for staff.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.